So here we go. Starting again, this is the point I this show, and the show has grown kind of long now, but initially it was shorter, and so I put this in. So here's Franchthi Cave in the string skirts. And there is like a 7,000-year continuity of the fringed belt in Greece and the Aegean Islands. And so this is a Cycladic woman's dress, and she's had to cover everything else up. That's been going on for quite a while, multiple layers actually, but the red fringe belt remains a form of women's dress in the islands and in Greece itself, and even further up into the Balkans. So there's something about this, you could call it ceremonial, but I think it's also manifestly has associations with the ability to bear children, with life force. The red also is a protector of this crucial part of the woman's body. And so Elizabeth Barber and other scholars have really fleshed this out in their studies of the modern dress, the back aprons, the front aprons of women in the Balkans, that there is a very strong association with being worn specifically after girls become women, some kind of initiation ceremony, the putting on of these skirts or belts or aprons. And that makes them a woman. And sometimes after menopause, women will stop wearing the fringes, but not always. So this is from Elizabeth Barber, and you can see examples from, these are Mordvins in Eurasia, the far eastern side of Russia. And you have Serbian and Romanian. Look at the length of these fringes. It's just, you see fringes and also tassels turning up a lot in Northern Europe. So this is Ireland, this is Denmark, this is Albania. And one of the conceptual frameworks that, I don't remember who wrote this, it might have been Barber, was that the existence of these tassels that move, and especially their redness, is considered to be a way of warding off negative spirits. It has a protective valence. And so it's considered that the many, many strands in the tassel or in the string skirt will be something that the spirits it confuses them. This resonates with modern European folklore about casting many seeds across the doorway in order to keep demons, or sometimes witches in the context of that era. They have to count every one before they can pass through the doorway. So these are beliefs that may be implicated also with the existence of these fringes, that they represent the fertility of the woman, but they also safeguard it. They safeguard her body. It's the sacredness of her body that is being invoked here. And the redness is something we see also in Southwest Asia, tying a red thread or piece of yarn around a baby's or a child's wrist as a protective amulet has a similar effect. So Barber is the one that really first started signaling the string skirts to us, and she went back to the Paleolithic. And this figure, this is her front from Lespug. You see this fringe skirt being, or tail or tassel or whatever you want to call it, hung actually below her buttocks, almost as if it represents an animal tail. And she also points to Gargarino. People will refer to this as Russia, but it's actually in Kazakhstan. So it's in Western Asia. And you can't really see it very well in the color photo, but the drawing shows more how there's this fringe being worn beneath her pregnant belly and above her genitals. That's Paleolithic. But look at this, it's the same garment being worn in the Andaman Islands. This is in the Bay of Bengal, the Black Islands. And so off the coast of Southeast Asia. I'm not saying that these are related in any kind of genealogical or historical way, but they are arisings of the same concept. The garment has a significance to it that's beyond the idea of, oh, I need to look pretty, or, I have to cover my body because it's cold out. It's clearly not cold out. It was in this society in the Paleolithic, but not in this one. So there's some kind of a going on. I have a question here for Morgan. How long do these spiral motifs remain prominent? Well, I guess I didn't catch that question quite soon enough. And does their disappearance coincide with any event, arrival of Indo-Europeans? You know, the spirals do continue along, not to the degree of prominence that they do in the archaic period, but you do see them continue, and a lot of times they're squared off. You know, you think about some of the key patterns that the Greeks do and stuff like that. Anyhow, so this is still Barber, and she's comparing Gagarino with other figurines from the Vinca culture, other Balkan figurines. This one very clearly showing a sash that's wrapped multiple times around the belly, which you see here also, and then the fringe hanging down. And so you can see this in color here in these actual clay figurines, where there's the belt. She has a little bit of a kilt apron there on the front, but also you see the fringes hanging to the side, and the same here. So I'm sure many more photographs like that could be found. So the Cucuteni Tripilia culture, which runs from Romania to Ukraine, and this is in the same time frame as the Greek Neolithic, or the Aegean Neolithic. We see a lot of figures, mother and daughter again, showing up here and wearing these fringe skirts. The gesture, one hand on the hip and the other to the forehead, almost like a salute, is something that we see also in Cretan art several thousand years later. And it's specifically associated with saluting a goddess. So it's a gesture of reverence. These are offerings in this old painted ceramic. These are obviously all drawings. You can see a lot of these are fragmentary, so pieces are missing. But this is pretty much a universal theme, this women in the string skirt, throughout the Cucuteni culture. Here's an actual photograph of it. I had a better quality one to show you these patterns of the streams, the sheets of rain perhaps, but also kind of Baltic looking. And then here's one in color, thank you, where the women have long string skirts dancing. And then you have, I think this is maybe the same pa, I'm not sure. You have the male figures with just very long legs. And so, you know, there's that gender difference. Now this one is from Iraq during the early dynastic period. Actually, you're well in the dynastic period by this time. And this is a charioteer. When I showed this the other day, I was saying, well, this seems to be an example of a man wearing a string skirt. And somebody promptly said, well, how do you know it's a man? Just because it's driving a chariot. And she was right. I can't really say that for sure, although I still tend to think that this is going to be a male figure just based on what I know about Iraq in this time period and, you know, the militarization that was going on. But, you know, you have women warriors too. So Denmark, another really well-attested group, the string skirt being worn on this bronze figurine, who looks to have been holding a spear in one hand to her other breast, eyes in gilt. So that's interesting. There's another figure I couldn't dig up for this of acrobat doing a backbend in this same dress. And this is also kind of a maiden dress in the context of Denmark. Breasts uncovered in this case, and in others wearing a homespun and ochre-dyed blouse. But there's the string skirt, the actual string skirt with the belt and its tassels. And on that belt was suspended a bronze solar disc that was inscribed with coursing spirals that went around in concentric circles. So this is known as the egg-fed maiden. And she was buried in a tree coffin, hollowed out. You can see a bed of fur there. There's a little glimpse also of the disc, which is reproduced here. So this is the attempt to reconstruct what it would look like on the woman. What's interesting is that this disc was worn over the womb, and it has very strong solar symbolism that is repeated in other art of the sun chariot that is from the Bronze and Iron Ages in Denmark.
We can't hear you, Max. Max, you're muted and we can't hear you.
I don't know how I came in here. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. Sorry about that. All right, so I'm going to start over since I was muted. So here's another example of a tree coffin with a woman in it and the same solar disc over the womb, also a knife. And she's wearing, instead of a fringe skirt, she's wearing a knotwork belt with pendants of copper. Very beautiful in their aged form. So that's Denmark. Now we're going to go over to, oh, you know what? One second. Well, it looks like it's still recording, so we're all right. We're going to go over to Chile. Hold on a second. There we go. So these very thick strands, and you can see some of them are ochre dyed, are woven or spun, corded out of alpaca or vicuña or some kind of a camelid, you know, the South American camels, basically. Part of a string skirt. And this is at a site called Caserones in Chile, which is like the first millennium BC, as I recall. So here's a kind of raggedy looking example, not a color photo. And so we're seeing this showing up. This is so international. The more I look into this, it's like it becomes like a major pattern. They even have a little female icon wearing a sash and a string skirt. So, and look how small she is. That's a hand. Very small. And so in living cultures in South America, in this case Colombia, the Huitoto women were having string skirts. And you can see over on the right, there's some kids there that are actually wearing them, or you might want to call those a grass skirt. Same basic concept. This ceremony, whatever it is, they've got this long belt with the strands hanging down from it. And it looks to me like something is going to be done with it, but I just have this one photo. And then if we move up to California, there's another variation, and this is a more complex one. First, most of the time, sometimes these could be vegetal fibers, but most commonly it's deer skin strips. So they're slicing strips, and then they're also affixing them with beads and pieces of shells. And then over the whole thing, you also have a hip cape with pendants of abalone. So these are found all throughout northwestern California. So the Yurok, the Hupa, the Tolowa. And here's another example. You can see how richly adorned they are with shells and abalone. This here to me looks like the same material, the same white buckskin fringed out, which is commonly done across North America. And then over here, this kind of looks like it might actually be some kind of, you know, basket weave, vegetal fibers. But anyway, this is still a living tradition, and people don't have access to the deer skins anymore. So the women are working with cloth, but they're keeping that fringed pattern alive that was still very much present, you know, from the continuity from who knows how far back in time. There's another from the same region with this very rich cowrie hip cape draped around the body, and then the fringes heavily, heavily beaded with pendants. And then Hupa Nation, this is definitely buckskin fringe, and then some of it has been beaded out with little, these look like they might be brass bells, but they suppose they could be deer hooves, which are used as rattles in a lot of North America. And then the abalone pendants. So this whole thing, this is the back view. It wraps and ties around the front. And then more, this is so glorious, the hupa. What's interesting about this region is you have people from 3 different language families. Hupa speak a Diné language, so they're relatives of the Navajo and the Athabascans in Alaska. The Yurok, who speak a language that is Algonquin language. They're like an outlier way out west. And then there's a 3rd group that are Hokan speakers. And so there's a lot of cultural similarities from the area, even though they're, ancestrally not related to each other. I'm going to put the mute on here in just a moment. Okay. And so now we move to Southeast Africa. And this is in silhouette, but you can see the strands, the irregular shape also of her skirt or her apron, as it's sometimes referred to in African context, a woman giving a massage. Here's a clearer view in a rock painting. We don't have a site name on this yet. Ochre painting from Zimbabwe. And some of these, you see a very long back panel. The back apron shows up very clearly in South Africa also. And one of its functions would have been, it was actually something to sit on. You have other strands in both cases. There's one coming down between the legs. Maybe these are the ties that it was attached with. And you also see a shorter front strand on some of these. And this one, I'll show you a painting in a moment that almost looks like this could be a penis, except there are breasts. So here again, we see those same multiple strands, mostly hanging from the back. This is a glorious painting from Chisewe. A shamanic scene, woman with lioness, from Mutoko, another rock painting. And this one really puzzled me because I was starting to wonder, this one clearly has breasts. She has a package on her back with an antelope baby in it. She's also carrying, birds are riding on her body. Kind of interesting. And then the many strands. This one, however, has no breasts and appears to have a male genitals, also with a baby on the back and the strands. But when I look, I'm not, this could be someone who would be considered trans, modern. Other examples, I'm not so sure of that. The person is breastless. So, figure. And you see these very, very similar types of string skirts being worn. These are dreamings of ancestral beings in the Kimberley, and a reflection of ceremonial regalia that dates back a really, really long time. They have found wasp nests over some of these Kimberley murals, rock galleries, that have been radiocarbon dated to 17,000 years ago. And the wasp nest was built on top of the painting, so the painting could be far older than that. So just saying. But anyway, painted all here in red ochre. This one's brown. These flying beings, and I take these as female because of the type of skirts that they're wearing. Now this years ago, so we can't be certain about any of this, and these represent ancestral beings. So, but it's just like it really tracks with what we're seeing in other places, and also the modern dress of women in Aboriginal Australia. And so sometimes you'll have a string belt from which are suspended emu feathers. So feathers is another way to do it. Or I'm not really sure what these are. They look like sticks of some kind from the piu-piu that are worn by Maori women. This one looks a lot more, these two actually look more like classical African string skirts or South Pacific string skirts. And you find also the fringes and tassels being worn on the cloaks that are popular in traditional Maori regalia. That's just a little sidebar. Here's another beautiful view. The women wove linen in these beautiful patterns and then tied it off with fringe. And you've got the feathers in there too. So that's the Maori. And so split leaves also did this same service. You've got it kind of knotted at the top. This is very similar, in fact, to what we saw in Denmark. And, almost hair-like look to the way these leaves are hanging down. And then, you know, you've got this tie, it ties around the body. So this is a Sisi belt. I'm not quite sure where this is from. I'm guessing it might be in Micronesia, which is the Western Pacific, but it didn't come with any identifier. So she's both wearing the belt and also making one, vegetal fiber. And this one also, another one from leaf, from Tonga, still in the South Pacific. And Papua New Guinea is another place where you see these string skirts. You know, a lot of these places are areas where you don't really need clothing for warmth. It has instead cultural significance attached to it. And it can be blessing, it can be protective, it may represent the woman's life force, you know, curtains, veils, all these kinds of things. So a back curtain and a front curtain. Here's an example also from Papua New Guinea. And there's the red showing up again, along with whatever these white flaps are, alternating. And then if we move to Africa, the Fali people in northern Cameroon, who have neither, at least the last I heard, converted to Islam or Christianity in the colonial era. This seems like it might be raffia or something similar to that, a plant fiber, very closely woven or twined in the belt area and then just hanging down so fluidly over her body. Here's another example in black, and you've got the upper part beaded with cowries and trade beads. And I think this is the front where these tassels hang. So concealment is not necessarily the agenda in all cases. In Cameroon and Chad, you will see a lot of these types of tasseled or suspended skirts in beads. And I could do a whole other chunk, but I'm trying to not make this too long, of ritual belts or aprons that are beaded, that are typically acquired by girls when they reach womanhood. And so this is an initiation into womanhood where they're wearing these because they're now first wearing the woman's belt. And look how similar in this beadwork with the fringed strands. This is in a completely different other part of the world in Indonesia, wherever the Enggano may be. I'm not sure. This might be Kalimantan or one of the countries in the island of Borneo. Or we can go up into Central Asia, and here we're going back in time again. And so this is an ochre dyed corded wool string skirt, woven or maybe finger twined up here with the strands as a sash that goes around the body, and then this hanging down. Well, I don't even know, is this the front or the back? But this is from Central Asia and along the Silk Road area. So in some places in Africa, these are still active. This is everyday wear for the matrilineal and matrilocal Bijogos people off the coast of Africa. Guinea-Bissau is right next door to Senegal, so that helps you place it. It's the farthest west corner of Africa. And so you can see both the elder woman and this younger woman wearing it. And you also see it being more elaborately worn, again with the red, for ceremony. And this may again be a womanhood initiation ceremony. This is one of the most egalitarian societies on the planet that I've found currently existing. Women have a very, very strong position ceremonially and otherwise. They also are the ones to propose marriage. You can see the influence of mainlanders coming in, and they have the need to adapt coverings over the breast. But this is, again, the initiation ceremony of womanhood. And look at this amazing horned headdress. And then we go back down. See, I had a slide earlier from there. And so the belt with the pendant strings, this is the pattern we keep seeing everywhere. And so these are the Jarawa, and I think all of the women in these islands have traditionally worn them. The red coloring comes up again, and they're wearing it both around their necks and around their hips. Here's a really beautiful photo of them. severely endangered culture. They're really at risk from outsiders coming in and messing with them. And they're vulnerable also to foreign diseases. And so then we have from Australia, this is a dreaming painted by Gracie Green from Balgo, which is one of the desert cultures in northwestern Australia. And it's called Women with Fire Sticks traveling over land with the kingfisher spirit hovering there above them. And so they're holding the fire sticks. And these were used in travel to keep the fire, from place to place.